Get ready to hear some timeless historical radio broadcasts. Thank you for visiting Golden Age Radio. Listen to the complete NBC and CBS D-Day broadcasts on rebel.com/C/GAR. Support our veterans by visiting veteransradioministry.com. Let's honor their sacrifice. Thank you.
5:30 a.m. Eastern Wartime, WEIF, New York. From our studios here in Radio City, New York, George Shackley, seated at the console of the organ, will present a concert of organ music. Following that, we'll present the NBC Concert Orchestra under the direction of Ori Nosko. Right now, ladies and gentlemen, George Shackley.
Ladies and gentlemen, the National Broadcasting Company continues its worldwide coverage of the invasion story. We take you now to London.
For all networks, coming over this transmitter in 45 seconds from now. 45 seconds coming up. Woof. Stand by for a pool broadcast by Stanley Richardson over this circuit. This is Stanley Richardson in London. There's little late news to report on the invasion of northern France beyond the communique you heard a few minutes ago. That said, Allied landings had continued throughout yesterday. Presumably, fighting is going on a fairly large scale. But there's nothing to indicate as yet the extent or the effectiveness of German resistance. A spokesman for Supreme Allied headquarters here in London acknowledged this morning that there was heavy fighting on the beaches in some localities during the initial assault yesterday. It was not until midday yesterday, he said, that most of our beachheads were free from direct enemy fire. He warned that the many early reports of lack of resistance by the Germans dealt only with the operations preceding the actual invasion. It may be some time yet before we will be told how widespread was the resistance beginning with the period of the landings themselves. But the obvious inference from the spokesman's remarks was that we should not allow ourselves to become over-optimistic to the extent that we lead ourselves to believe the operation from now on is going to be a walkaway for the Allied armies. The chances are that it certainly will not be any easy task. In support of this belief, a naval spokesman for Allied headquarters indicated that enemy attempts to get their submarines into the channel are expected. At least, they are expected to the extent that thorough defense preparations have been made to deal with them should they try to get into the area of operations. The work of our naval protecting units is not over, the spokesman added, and they may be heavily tested later. In this connection, it was emphasized that not all of the enemy shore batteries have been altogether obliterated, although most of them were put temporarily out of action by our naval and aircraft bombardment prior to the landing. It was stated some of them, at least, may have been restored to some usable shape. In any case, it was stated officially that the Allied naval bombardment of the northern French coast may have to continue for some time. There have been no casualties to United States naval craft since yesterday beyond those announced by President Roosevelt. During yesterday, American 8th Air Force heavy bombers flew 4,300 sorties over the area of operations. The American 9th Air Force flew 4,800 sorties. This is Stanley Richardson returning you now to the United States.
Ladies and gentlemen, NBC's overseas reporter Stanley Richardson has spoke to you from London. We now resume our musical program.
Henri Nasco conducts the NBC Concert Orchestra and a John Philip Sousa march, The Invincible Eagle. Stirring and dramatic, such are the adjectives for this next music, the Suite for Orchestra from Sigurd Jorsalfar by Edvard Grieg. Most of the dramatic compositions of Edvard Grieg for large orchestra were inspired by poetic works of Björnson. Sigurd Jorsalfar is not one of this famous poet's chief works, but according to Grieg's claim, it is a folk piece in the best sense of the word, and is often performed on national holidays. In its entirety, the incidental music to this play consists of characteristic numbers, which are in keeping with the dramatic story of the adventurous Norwegian crusader. It is originally scored for solo, male chorus, and orchestra. The principal numbers of this score, which are to be presented by Mr. Nosko, are the introduction, intermezzo, and a triumphal march. In the introduction, Grieg has succeeded in giving a musical picture of his hero in all his strength and ruggedness. While containing all of the characteristic and melodic beauty of his best works, Edvard Grieg has succeeded in giving an additional touch of striking originality to this number through virtue of the virility and inherent spontaneity of his themes. The intermezzo is a composition of inspired beauty. For those who are fond of comparison, it may not be devoid of interest to view this number beside Elsa's Vision, Richard Wagner's Lohengrin. The two composers are curiously divergent. Both, though, have seized the possibilities of a simple scale as a means of expressing an emotion. With Wagner, the dream would seem to float upwards, soaring ever higher and higher. With Grieg, it tends to descend as from heaven to earth. The Triumphal March is one of the most superb marches in existence. It is one of the longest of Grieg's compositions and one of the most stirring. Its second part is one of the most exquisitely tender episodes in all musical literature, a melody rivaling Schubert, the greatest of all melodists, at his very best. Mr. Nosko, the NBC Concert Orchestra, give you now this Suite for Orchestra from Sigurd Jorsalfar. selections from Sigurd Jorsalfar by Edvard Grieg, played for you by the NBC Concert Orchestra under the direction of Henri Nosco. George Shackley, seated at the console of the organ, plays for us now a melody from the pen of the French composer Alexander Guillemot, his grand chorus. George Shackley at the console of the organ has played music for you from our studios in New York. This is the National Broadcasting Company. 6 a.m. Eastern Wartime, WEIF, New York.
This is the NBC Newsroom in New York. This is your reporter, Don Goddard. The Allied communique, number 3, this morning, as communiques always do, contains carefully worded phrases. No extravagant announcement, this. We can only read between the cautious lines and get some overall picture of how well our attack really seems to be developing there on the northern coast of France. First, we're told, officially, that the Allies have made new landings along the invasion coast. We know, too, that the enemy has not had the sea power to interfere with those Allied ships which carried the assaulting troops to the shores of France. No further attempt at interference with our seaborne landing has been made by enemy naval forces. Those are the exact words from the communique number 3. And then we learn, too, that in those sectors where the enemy coastal batteries have not been reduced to silence, heavy units of the Allied navies are still pounding away. We've kept hammering at the big guns protecting Hitler's west wall, and we'll keep on pounding until all the Nazi guns are mute. And then the Allied communique, this communique number 3, gives these significant details on the progress made by our air forces. At twilight yesterday, says General Eisenhower's command, and for the 4th time during that day, Allied heavy bombers attacked rail communications and bridges in the general battle area. There was some increased air opposition by the Nazis, and it cost them 26 planes. We lost 1 bomber and 17 fighters. And the Germans also sent out some planes to hamper the operations of our landing troops. This venture proved abortive, however. Those are the official words, and the Germans lost 4 heavy Junkers in one formation. And other flights of our planes attacked Amiens and the cities of the Somme Valley. The Somme Valley, as you know, is to the east of the Valley of the Seine, where our landings first were made. But, of course, even with all the information we have out of this communique, there are still some important questions to be asked. The communique of necessity doesn't fill us in on the complete picture, and that's why NBC's Stanley Richardson went to invasion headquarters and put a few pointed questions to the official spokesman there. Some of the things which were said off record, of course, and other things weren't discussed at all. But our NBC correspondent, Mr. Richardson, is still able to give us some mighty important and rather interesting comment from these official spokesmen. Richardson reported, for instance, that not until midday yesterday was enemy fire suppressed at all points where our troops landed. The full story of those operations has not yet been told and cannot be told. Someday, Richardson says, we'll learn the official details. Then we'll know what happened there on the coast of France on D-Day. Right now, the official spokesman has told the NBC reporter, we know that we shouldn't expect to walk away there on the invasion beaches. Chances are that battle will not become any easier, that we can expect a rough road ahead. And the official spokesman also warned that the enemy will send submarines, or will try to send submarines into the channel, and that we may yet have the problem of some stiff enemy naval oppositions from those submarines there in the waters between the British Isles and the French invasion coast. Of course, already our Navy is taking precautions against those submarines, but the Navy's job is not yet done. A bulletin from London. London says a German Transocean news agency broadcast has just announced that German mobile formations have reinforced coastal defenses in France. This is an enemy report. This is the NBC Newsroom in New York.
Ladies and gentlemen of the American radio audience, the National Broadcasting Company and its affiliated stations has exerted the utmost effort since the opening of D-Day to bring you a complete and thorough account of the most important 24 hours in our history. We are proud of our staff abroad on the scene of action and our staff at home, which has worked untiringly to keep you informed of the invasion developments. Yesterday, our regular schedule was supplanted by continuous reporting of D-Day events. Today we ought to resume the broadcasting of your favorite programs, but all programs are subject to interruption for any important news. And at the beginning of each program, we will broadcast the latest bulletins as they are received. Keep tuned to your NBC station. And now we resume our musical program.
Maureen Nosko conducts the NBC Concert Orchestra now, and John Philip Sousa's stirring march, Hands Across the Sea. Here's another march, this one by Scotson Clark, played on the king of instruments, the organ. George Shackley is our artist, and he plays the Torchlight March. Returning now to Henri Nosco and the NBC Concert Orchestra, we hear gay and exciting music from the works of Georges Bizet. Although a French composer, Georges Bizet spent much of his time and effort in setting to music his impressions of life in Spain. Example is his charming and delightful opera Carmen, although it's true that Bizet did not forget his native land. Forthwith, we have his musical impression of life on the island of Arles. L'Arlésienne Suite by Georges Bizet.
The National Broadcasting Company continues its worldwide coverage of the invasion story. Here are the latest developments, the latest news that has come in on the Allied invasion of France, as that assault across the continent goes into its second day. The Berlin correspondent in Stockholm says that new Allied landings have been made throughout the night in northern France, particularly in the area of Caen. And new reinforcements, the total strength of the Allied invasion forces, has been brought to 6 parachute and airborne divisions. Of course, this is an enemy report. It comes from the Stockholm, which we have been warned by the OWI as not too reliable a source of information. But the information is there for what it's worth. And then there's the late report by NBC's Stanley Richardson, a late report direct from General Eisenhower's headquarters, telling us that there have been no new Allied naval losses. Losses since those announced yesterday afternoon, the loss of 2 destroyers and a tank landing ship. Richardson also has a word of caution, a warning that there are some tough battles ahead, that the enemy, which so far has offered only light naval resistance, might suddenly send submarines into the channel to interfere with our amphibious operations. And the third Allied communique this morning, headquarters says that Allied invasion forces are making satisfactory progress on the French coast. Landing operations are being carried out without interference from German naval forces. Allied heavy bombers made 4 attacks on enemy rail communications and bridges in the battle area during the first day of the invasion. 26 enemy planes were shot down. 1 Allied bomber and 17 fighter planes are missing. And in Italy, Fifth Army troops are 10 miles above Rome in their pursuit of the Germans. This report came to you from the NBC newsroom in New York.
.660 on your dial, WEAF, New York. We'd like to have you with us for another visit on your Modern Farmer program, which comes to you each weekday morning at this time with portions recorded and transcribed. Now here's that young man in charge, Mert Emmett. Hello, Mert.
Hello, Tom O'Brien. Good morning, everybody. Well, the great invasion is underway, and those of us here at home must keep on with our daily work, whatever it might be. Yes, we must keep on and keep a prayer in our hearts, along with the pain and anxiety we know is there, too. To begin with this morning, you have heard the news, of course. You will hear the news all through the day on WEAF as any important bulletins come in, as well as on the NBC programs throughout the day. To begin with, on this program this morning, we would like to present a hymn by Emil Cote and the choir. My faith looks up to thee. time is 24 minutes before 7 o'clock Eastern Wartime. Since this is Wednesday, folks, we're going to have a regular feature this morning, which, as many of you know, is the Orchard and Truck Crop Review. We think we have several items that will be of interest to both farm and city dwellers in today's edition. But first, here's a special word. Every farmer knows that a hailstorm can destroy a crop, yet some farmers are content in the belief that it always hails on the other fellow's farm. Did it ever occur to you that you may be the other fellow this year? Now, how long do you think that hail will continue to pass you by? Well, it's going to hail this summer, we can be sure of that, and your farm or no other farm is immune from hail. We know that, too. Well, hail damage to growing crops has always been quite a serious problem to farmers. 25 years ago, farmers asked insurance men to help them solve this problem. As a result, 13 leading old-line capital stock fire insurance companies got together and formed the Rain and Hail Insurance Bureau. Now, one of the jobs of this bureau is to supply farmers with free information about hail insurance on growing crops. I have here a mighty helpful free booklet published by the Bureau which tells you how the moderate cost of hail insurance protects you against loss from hail damage to your crops. Now, this attractive illustrated booklet will be sent to you free of charge without any cost or obligation. What do you have to do? Well, just this, and it's very simple. Just write your name and address and the word hail on the back of a penny postcard and mail it to Modern Farmer, Station WEAF, New York 20, New York. That's the word hail on the back of a penny postcard, along with your name and address, and mail it to Modern Farmer, Station WEAF, New York 20, New York. And we'd advise that you get that job done right away today. Well, time is 22 minutes before 7 o'clock Eastern Wartime. Well, this morning's headlines in the Orchard and Truck Crop Review include special word on vegetable prices, how to treat lima bean seed, how to make a better lettuce salad. Those are just a few of the things in this morning's review. Well, to begin with, the Senate and House Committee on Banking and Currency have filed separate bills that are being thrashed out at the present time. The Senate bill extends price control until December 31st, 1945. That's the end of next year, while the House would end it on June 1st of next year. The Senate version limits subsidies after June 30th of next year to funds appropriated by Congress for that purpose, while the House draft permits the continuation of present subsidies, but no others for the next 12 months. A provision included in the House bill reads like this. Whenever a maximum price is established on any fresh fruit or fresh vegetable, adequate allowance shall be made for hazards of production and marketing of such commodities throughout the crop year, including increased costs due to crop losses which have resulted or may result from such hazards. Now, if a maximum price has been established on any such commodity, the price administrator shall take immediate action to review and increase such maximum price from time to time by making further allowance to compensate for subsequent changes in such conditions, including reductions in crop yield. 20.5 minutes before 7 o'clock. The War Food Administration has announced some more A Award winners, recognition for outstanding performance in the production of food. So we'd like to salute a couple of the processing plants near at home that will soon be flying the coveted A Award banner. They are the California Packing Corporation of Brooklyn, New York, and the E. Greenbaum Company of New York City. 20 minutes before 7 o'clock. The New York State Experiment Station people at Geneva have been doing some mighty interesting work in checking new chemical seed protectants for use in treating lima bean seed. Poor stands of lima beans are almost the rule instead of the exception, or so it seems. The lima bean seeds are very susceptible to decay organisms in the soil, and the seed is so sensitive to treatment that ordinary materials are very apt to injure the seed. We're glad to see that the Geneva experiments with new organic seed protectants have given returns of 50 to 500 times the cost of the chemical. Of the chemicals tested, Spurgon is recommended without reservation. That's Spurgon at the rate of 2 ounces per bushel of lima bean seed, or 1/2 level teaspoonful to the pound of seed. That's 2 ounces per bushel of lima bean seed of Spurgon, or a 1/2 level teaspoon of Spurgon to a pound of lima bean seed. A couple of other chemicals, Arasan and Fermate, are promising, but the experiment station people feel that they should be given limited tests according to present findings. 19 minutes before 7 o'clock. Well, summertime is salad time. The main ingredient of most salads is lettuce. Now, the question is, do you know your lettuce? For example, did you know that approximately 1/3 of the lettuce consumed in New York City originates in either New York State or New Jersey? And did you know that the 3 leading types in the order of their importance are iceberg type, big Boston type, and romaine? Well, it seems that lettuce is one of the oldest cultivated vegetables of Old World origin, mentioned by the ancient Persians, the Greeks, and the Romans. From the earliest colonization period, lettuce has been grown in America, but only attained major importance in the past 30 or 35 years. Everyone's familiar with iceberg-type lettuce. The heads are usually quite solid, the leaves are crispy, and the center is rather well blanched. The big Boston or butterhead type is more loosely headed. Leaves are a good dark green color with a slight oily feeling, and the center leaves are only slightly blanched. Romaine lettuce is quite different from the other types of head lettuce. The leaves are long and rather narrow, they're sort of oval-shaped, and the head is fairly firm. The outer leaves have good green color, and the inner leaves are slightly blanched. Green color is very important in all varieties of lettuce, as it indicates a higher vitamin content and is therefore a little more nutritious. Good many other salad ingredients are in the market in profusion right now. There are plenty of them. They include radishes, scallions, parsley, cucumbers, beets, cabbage, celery, escarole, onions, green peppers, potatoes, turnips, and watercress. Salad combinations are almost unlimited, and everyone has 1 or 2 favorite combinations. They serve a triple purpose in daily meals. They add real eye appeal, they please the family's palate, and provide an appetizing means of getting the necessary minerals and vitamins into most any meal except breakfast. The time is 17 minutes before 7 o'clock Eastern War Time. Next, we turn to a note from the weekly newsletter of the Cooperative Fruit and Vegetable Association that's put out by our friend Porter Taylor down in Washington. Porter says that expiration of price ceilings on May 31st brought a repetition of what happened a month earlier in regard to OPA price ceilings on some vegetables. He mentions cabbage, snap beans, and cucumbers that were therefore without price ceilings on the 1st of June and presumably on June 2nd. Porter says on the afternoon of June 2nd, new ceilings were filed with the Federal Register shortly after 4 o'clock in the afternoon, but were made effective as of midnight of June 1st, which was 16 hours before filing with the Register. Porter adds that the press announcement was not released until the morning of June the 3rd. The June ceiling for snap beans is $2.70 per bushel FOB. That's 30 cents below the May rate and 30 cents above the $2.40 price for this month as proposed last October. As for cabbage, the ceiling price to retailers for June in this area is 3 9/10 cents per pound. Now, the May price of $4.20 per bushel for cucumbers has been reduced to $3.15 FOB from June 2nd to the 15th, and $2.10, that's $2.10 on cucumbers, from June 16th to June 30th. Time, 15.5 minutes before 7 o'clock. County Agent Walt Bean says that the Suffolk County Farm Wage Board out on Long Island is holding a public informal hearing this afternoon at 2 o'clock at the courthouse in Riverhead, Long Island. All farmers, farm workers, and others interested are cordially invited to attend and give their views as to prevailing farm wages in Suffolk County. Walt also gives this timely warning to Long Island potato growers. Colorado potato beetle slugs have started to hatch, and it's time to start spraying or dusting the spuds. Now, either a wet spray or dry dust can be used, and you can get full details on how to mix and use them from Walt's office at Riverhead. Walt strongly recommends that cobblers and other early varieties be dusted or sprayed this month with a material containing copper for the control of blight. Now, when you're spraying for the bug control that we mentioned just a moment ago, it doesn't cost much more to protect your early varieties against blight in June, this month, which is the most important time to prevent blight damage. Now, if there's blight on the cobbler vines at digging time, but later on, well, the spuds are very apt to rot during shipping to market. So this means that spraying for blight in June, that's this month, will help you with your marketing of the crop during July and August. And keep in mind that if you ship potatoes affected with blight rot, it can well ruin the demand and market for early dug cobblers. 14 minutes before 7 o'clock. Just a reminder that last Sunday, changes in the point value of foods for June were made by the OPA. There were 6 changes. The way it stands now, no points are needed for canned carrots, orange juice, orange grapefruit juice, and grapefruit juice. Grape juice was increased 4 points for the pint, and the new value is now 10 points per pint on grape juice. Pineapple juice was advanced 3 points. That makes it 15 points now for the number 2 can of pineapple juice. 13 and a half minutes before 7 o'clock. Approximately 5,000 community canning centers, the same as last year, are expected to operate this year with increased output, so the War Food Administration has reported to the OWI. It seems a great need for community canning centers this year is in the urban communities. Better trained supervisors, more plentiful equipment, and profit from lessons learned last summer, all these point to a larger, more successful pack of food in community canneries in 1944. Workshops for training canning center supervisors, who will in turn train patrons, are being held in practically every state. Most community centers can only in tin, and all are outfitted with pressure equipment for processing corn, peas, beans, and other low-acid vegetables. These vegetables are the source of the largest amount and most serious spoilage in home-processed foods. The time has gotten round to 12 and a half minutes before 7 o'clock Eastern War Time. That winds up our Orchard and Truck Crop Review for today. We bring you one of these Orchard and Truck Crop Reviews every Wednesday, folks, and we hope that it will be of interest to both you folks who produce the fruits and vegetables and also to the rest of us who are on the consuming end. Time now, 12 minutes before 7 o'clock Eastern War Time. We have a song that we hope you'll enjoy.
Oh, give me a home where the buffalo roam, where the deer and the antelope play, where seldom is heard a discouraging word, and the skies are not cloudy all day. Home, home on the range, where the deer and the antelope play, where seldom is heard a discouraging word, and the skies are not cloudy all day.
I have a true confession to make to you alone. It's all about the way I love you and adore you, my own. I've tried to seek expression for this desire I feel. You've made a very deep impression that my heart must reveal. Let me confess what I feel for you and the dreams that I dream. I'd even lie and steal for you, or go to most any extreme. This is my true confession. I swear by stars above, now you're in complete possession of my secret of love.
The time is 9 minutes before 7 o'clock Eastern War Time. Well, as you can well imagine, there has been considerable goings-on in our newsroom. There will be for some time, and it seems that this morning, inadvertently, the boys have misplaced the regional weather report. We don't have it for you this morning. We certainly will have it tomorrow, we're sure, and every other day. We do have the weather report for New York City and vicinity. Today, partly cloudy, moderately warm. The highest temperature, 78 degrees. Tonight, fair and rather cool. Lowest temperature, 60 degrees in the city, 55 in the suburbs. Tomorrow, fair and moderate temperature, dry air and moderate winds through tomorrow. The temperature now in New York City is 65 degrees. The humidity is 63%. And the time is 8 minutes before 7 o'clock Eastern War Time. Look now at our 180 special for this morning, 180 seconds or 3 minutes of streamlined news and notes we thought you might want to know about. Ladino clover, though it's a valuable crop, is a pretty tricky one to handle. Now, it's different from alfalfa and other clovers in its growth habits and has to be handled differently and given particular care during the grazing season, according to our friend H.R. Cox, who's extension agronomist at Rutgers. Lots of growers found out last year that Ladino clover won't stand the continuous grazing that a little white clover gets in permanent pastures. Ladino needs rotation grazing with ample periods of recovery in between grazing, and it needs 5 or 6 inches of top growth with which to go into the winter. 7.5 minutes before 7 o'clock. How would you like to have a portable barbecue pit to take around from place to place this summer? Well, we know that may sound a little funny, but Better Homes and Gardens magazine has a suggestion for making yourselves a portable pit if you have a steel-bodied wheelbarrow. They say to fill the wheelbarrow partly with screened sand, then take a few pieces of 1/4 by 1 inch strap iron, which you can probably find in a junkyard, long enough to reach across the barrel and bend down an inch or so on each side. 3 or 4 of these straps spaced a few inches apart across the steel-bodied wheelbarrow will support grills, coffee pots, and sundry utensils over the fire that you build in the sand right in the wheelbarrow. It's 6.5 minutes before 7 o'clock. Liming your soil is one job that can't very well wait this year, according to the experts up at Cornell, and it's very important that you put the right amount of lime on your soil at the right time, particularly when you're growing vegetables. Now, lack of lime will result in poor crops where lime is needed, and we can't afford any such crop failures these days. Now, just exactly what the right amount of lime is depends on several things naturally. The kind of crop you're going to grow is one of them. Some crops, you know, are more sensitive to an acid soil than others are. Then you've got to check and see what reaction your soil has this year. Soil texture also figures in. And the amount to put on depends on the kind of lime that you will be using. It's 6 minutes before 7 o'clock. With warm weather here, your dairy cows are going to need plenty of water and shade while they're on pasture. C.N. Hall, who's the new extension dairyman over at Penn State, tells us that a large-sized cow that's producing heavily will drink between 150 to 300 pounds of water every 24 hours. Now, that may seem like a lot of water, but it just shows how important it is to have water before your cows all the time. Now, if you have to use tanks or troughs, be sure that they're good and clean. They should be cleaned out every 2 weeks in hot weather. Now, if your cows are going to consume all the water necessary for real capacity milk production, the water must be fresh and clean. You'll find that cows will drink more water between 6 and 9 o'clock in the evening than any other time during the day. Now, cows suffer from extreme heat as well as extreme cold, so make sure that your cows have plenty of shade on pasture. If there aren't any trees around, give them a shed that is open on all sides. The time is 5 minutes before 7 o'clock Eastern War Time. That's all the 180 special for this morning. And here's a very interesting note on the Farm News Wires from Washington this morning. After considerable shopping around, President Roosevelt finally found a man to fill a USDA vacancy. He nominated Charles F. Brannan of Denver, Colorado, to be Assistant Secretary of Agriculture. The job became vacant when Grover B. Hill was promoted to the position of Undersecretary of Agriculture, succeeding Paul H. Appleby. Brannan was formerly Denver Regional Director of the Farm Security Administration. Not long ago, he was appointed Chief of Water Conservation for the FSA. It's understood that the Assistant Secretary spot was offered to several men, including Murray Lincoln, head of the Ohio State Farm Bureau Federation. The President also nominated a new governor of the Farm Credit Administration. He's Ivy W. Dugan, whose nomination to succeed Dr. A.G. Black came as no surprise. 4 minutes before 7 o'clock. We'd like to remind you again that you can get that free illustrated booklet that tells you about inexpensive hail insurance. Here's all you have to do. Write your name and address and the word hail on the back of a penny postcard and mail that postcard today to the Modern Farmer, station WEAF, New York 20, New York. And now, our morning hymn. We'd like to say that may those lads who are doing that big job march straight and well, as Christian soldiers always have and always will. The time in 20 seconds will be 1 minute before 7 o'clock Eastern War Time. Tomorrow morning we're going to visit a group of up-and-coming New Haven County, Connecticut 4-H club people in the town of Orange. We'll talk with county leader Warren Brockett, several leaders and members of the Orange 4-H Agricultural Club. Of course, we'll have another edition of the 180 Special, songs and music we hope you'll enjoy, including our morning hymn, latest news and weather reports. Well, for now, this is Mert Emmert saying goodbye, the best of luck, and keep smiling. Man's inhumanity to man makes thousands mourn.
Well, so long, Mert Emmert, until tomorrow. Friends, you've been listening to your Modern Farmer program conducted by Mert Emmert. This program, with portions recorded and transcribed, comes to you each weekday morning at 6:30 from our Radio City studios. This is the National Broadcasting Company. In these historic days, invasion news comes first. NBC will interrupt any and all programs to bring you the latest invasion bulletin. Stay tuned to WEAF, New York.
Continuing its special worldwide coverage of the invasion on D-Day, CBS World News now presents Quincy Howell with up-to-the-minute developments. Mr. Howell.
Instead of repeating more recent scattered bulletins, it seems a good idea at this point to insert in today's broadcast a summary of the main events of the past 18 hours. Shortly before midnight, the German radio announced, "This is D-Day," and spoke of Allied parachutists landing in France. 3 hours later came the first official announcement from Supreme Allied Headquarters in Britain. It stated that the invasion had begun with heavy sea and air bombardment. Meanwhile, the underground resistance movement had been addressed by various exiled leaders speaking over the shortwave radio from Britain. And General Eisenhower's headquarters told the inhabitants of the French coast that the air attacks on that region were entering a new phase. From then on, events moved rapidly and the real news began to come in. Prime Minister Churchill told the House of Commons that the crossing by sea had proved less difficult than had been expected. The fire of the German shore batteries was quickly quelled. Then came massed airborne landings, the largest in history. Everything was proceeding according to a plan, Churchill declared, and added, "And what a plan." He thought we might have achieved tactical, that means sort of local, surprise. Britain's General Montgomery commanded the first invasion troops, who included British, Canadian, and Americans. And the day before D-Day, he predicted that the Germans would make their strongest fight right on the beachheads themselves. But things went so well at the beachheads that it now seems likely that the Germans are saving their big punch till later. In fact, a bulletin came in a few minutes ago from Supreme Allied Headquarters saying that the first German counterattack in France is likely to materialize within the next 48 hours. That's what informed headquarters there say. But the first report said little about the location of these landings. Until in a second appearance before the House of Commons, Mr. Churchill announced that the city of Caen, that's spelt C-A-E-N, at the eastern end of the peninsula of Normandy, was being attacked by glider and parachute troops. Later, our ground forces penetrated 9.5 miles inland in this area to fight in the streets of Caen itself. Churchill disclosed that the Allies had put 11,000 planes into the air and 4,000 naval vessels onto the sea. British warships in this armada poured shells into the area near the port of Le Havre at a rate of 2,000 tons in 10 minutes. Royal Air Force planes carried the brunt of the night fighting. Then the Americans took over at daylight, and between them, that is, between the Americans and the British, they provided steady cover for the ships and landing parties. The Germans put only 50 planes into the air, and this after Marshal Goering, the head of the German Air Force, had said the invasion must be stopped even if it means the death of the Luftwaffe. By this time, it had become clear that the main weight of our first attack was being directed against the peninsula of Normandy, which juts out northward from the northern coast of France into the English Channel. Further to the west lies the larger peninsula of Brittany, which marks the entrance of the English Channel. The purpose of this first attack seems to be to pinch off the whole Norman Peninsula. At the tip of this peninsula lies the big port of Cherbourg. We may also be aiming to take Le Havre, which lies a few miles northeast of Caen on another small peninsula that juts out beyond the mouth of the River Seine. The Seine empties into the sea between Caen and Le Havre and flows through Paris a couple of 100 miles inland. Prime Minister Churchill not only kept right on scooping the world with his bulletins of Allied progress, he acted as his own commentator. He said the Allies had accomplished their first successes with extremely light losses. He singled out the airborne troops, many of them Americans, for especially high praise. He then predicted much heavier blows by both sides. He warned that the Germans will rush troops to the regions under attack, but he also let it be known that the Allied armies have new weapons, new tactics, everything, in short, that equipment, science, and forethought can do to make this great offensive a success. Mr. Churchill lived up to his character, his reputation, and his position as the King's first minister. He therefore left it to the King, King George VI, as the head of the British state, to strike a more solemn religious note in a measured broadcast delivered to the world 3 hours ago. The King spoke with difficulty and deep feeling. He called for earnest and continuous and widespread prayer throughout the present crisis of the liberation of Europe. We are not unmindful of our shortcomings of the past and present, said King George. We shall not ask that God may do our will, but that we may be enabled to do the will of God. And we dare to believe that God has used our nation and empire as an instrument for fulfilling his high purpose. President Roosevelt, who's the head of our state, as King George is the head of the British state, also urged his people to have recourse to prayer. In fact, as soon as the president finished his broadcast on the fall of Rome last night, he composed a prayer of his own, which he will deliver over all the major networks this evening at 10 p.m. Eastern Wartime, 4 hours from now, and which he asks us all to join him in offering up. He prayed to God to lead our soldiers straight and true. He also prayed for world unity that will spell a sure peace, a peace invulnerable to the schemings of unworthy men. The Russians, of course, don't go in for prayer quite so much as the British and Americans do, but none of their own victories caused more joy than today's news. This is what the Russians have been waiting for during almost 3 years of the most devastating war any country has ever suffered. They now feel that the Anglo-American armies really are in there, fighting the same enemy. They see hopes of early victory. They expect their own armies to start moving westward against the Germans any time now. But the military aspects of our attack from the west, important as they are not the only reason for the exaltation of the Russian people. For the past quarter century and more, the Russians have felt themselves cut off from the rest of the world. Their leaders have told them that the rest of the world wanted to wipe out their regime and undo the achievements of their revolution. The Russians had plenty of reason to distrust the outside world in the early years of their revolution. But as they built up their country, they began to become more curious about the outside world. They began to encourage visitors, though they never encouraged their own people to emigrate, and their regime exercised a dictatorial control over their daily lives. Then came the war. The Hitler-Stalin pact isolated Russia from the West. The German attack then threatened to destroy them utterly. But their own power and the increased help they got from Britain and the United States pulled them through. Now they see the Western allies putting on an offensive that matches some of their own efforts against the common enemy. They also hear leaders in Britain and America, men who used to fear and hate Russian communism, praising their country and calling for cooperation between the Soviet Union and the rest of the world. Today, on the beaches of northern France, the Russians therefore see a new period in their history beginning, a period in which they will play a larger part with other nations. The fact of Russia never meant more to us in the United States than it does today, because only today have the Russians received the final proof they have been looking for all these years, that we are with them in the war and in the peace. And a bulletin just handed me from Reuters, the British news agency, says, scores of United States heavy bombers, heavily escorted by fighters, took off from an American base in Russia and roared over the Soviet-German front to shower many tons of high explosive and incendiary bombs on aerodrome installations at Galatz in the first American raid of the war from the new shuttle bases in Russian territory. We're still awaiting Allied Communique number 2, and we'll switch to London for it as soon as word comes in that it's ready, so there may be a sudden interruption in this program at any point. Well, for the Russians, the final results of today's landings can mean only better tidings. For the French, the future is not so clear and not so certain. While Frenchmen in Algiers embraced one another on the street and wept for joy, feeble old Marshal Pétain tottered up to a German microphone in Paris and urged his people to refrain from action which would call down upon you tragic reprisals. France has become a battlefield, he continued. The circumstances of battle may compel the German army to take special measures in the area. And here's the bulletin, Supreme Allied Expeditionary Force. Wednesday, June 7, Allied forces succeeded in their initial landings and fighting continues, said Supreme Headquarters of the Allied Expeditionary Force today. This report is still coming in. There'll be more in a few minutes. Marshal Pétain, getting back to his speech again, told all workers in France to remain at their posts. Do not listen to outside voices, he warned, calling on you not to listen to our decrees. But shortly after the voice of Pétain had spoken these words, a British broadcasting station put on General de Gaulle, who's just arrived in London. General de Gaulle urged the French people to fight with all the means at their disposal. The supreme battle has begun, he said. This is the decisive blow which we have so much hoped for. This is the battle of France and France's battle. He called on all the sons of France to fight with all the means at their disposal. He also told the people of France to follow exactly the orders given by his government. It's hard to exaggerate the tragedy of General de Gaulle's present position, indeed the present position of France. He and his followers must not only fight the Germans, they must fight the apathy and suspicion of some of their own people. And they must fight the doubts and hesitations of some of our leaders, who have withheld full diplomatic recognition right up to the very end. Perhaps our authorities have acted wisely in withholding this full diplomatic recognition that de Gaulle has been demanding for more than a year. But if the strongest leader in the French resistance movement does not deserve more than partial recognition, then that resistance movement is weak indeed. And if the French committee does deserve better of us, if de Gaulle is able to rally the French people, those people will always reproach us because we did not do more to help them in their hour of need. And then, again, getting back to this communique, in its second communique on the invasion, Supreme Headquarters of the Allied Expeditionary Forces said that the Allied assault forces met little opposition in the Channel or in the air. And here's communique number 3, also from SHAEF. Light, heavy, and medium Allied bombers continued their air bombardment in very great strength throughout the day, with attacks on gun emplacements, defensive works, and communications. And here is communique 4 just in. Continuous fighter cover was maintained over the beaches and for some distance inland and over naval operations in the Channel. That also is included in the communique. These landings in Western Europe overshadow, of course, the fighting north of Rome. But today's dispatches from the Italian capital report good progress on that front, too. American troops have moved ahead 5 miles beyond the Tiber River. Troops from French Morocco have captured Tivoli Junction 16 miles east of Rome. And British troops at the western end of the front, down by the mouth of the Tiber, have taken 2,000 more German prisoners. Yesterday, our troops beyond Rome met with no enemy opposition at all. The Germans were retreating too fast. Today, they defeated German rear guards in fierce tank fighting, and from then on, the opposition again weakened. The Germans quit Rome so fast they left 11 of the 14 main bridges across the Tiber River intact. Our Mediterranean Air Forces flew 2,400 sorties yesterday, most of them against rail yards and bridges in northern Italy. And from Naples comes the news that Marshal Badoglio has dissolved his present all-party government, and that Crown Prince Umberto, who's taken on his father's job as king, has asked Badoglio to form a new government. The king is dead, long live the king. Or to quote another French proverb, the more it changes, the more it's the same thing. And now for some more bulletins and dispatches that have come in during the past hour or two. This afternoon, President Roosevelt told his White House news conference that the invasion of Europe is up to schedule. Up to noon Eastern Wartime today, Mr. Roosevelt told his news conference that American naval losses in the invasion consisted of 2 destroyers and 1 LST landing craft. Total air losses were 1%, a figure the president described as relatively light. There were more than 150 newsmen jammed into the big Oval Office for the first presidential conference since the invasion. Mr. Roosevelt was in shirt sleeves and smiling. He said he thought it was going to be a very happy conference. But he did say the country had full reason to be thrilled, but he hoped this would not lead to overconfidence, which would destroy the war effort. And Prime Minister Churchill has received today this congratulatory message from Premier Stalin of Russia on the liberation of Rome. I congratulate you on the great victory of the Allied Anglo-American forces in the taking of Rome. This news has been greeted in the Soviet Union with great satisfaction. And I'm repeating again the late communique that's just come in from Supreme Headquarters Allied Expeditionary Forces. Allied forces succeeded in their initial landings and fighting continues. In its second communique of the invasion, SHAEF said that the Allied assault forces met little opposition in the Channel or on the air. And Radio Berlin reported big air battles over Romania, while the daily Soviet communique said the Red Army had repulsed continuing Nazi attacks north and northeast of Iasi in Romania, and that Russian bombers had carried out a mass raid on Iasi itself.
You have just heard CBS analyst Quincy Howell with up-to-the-minute developments of the Allied invasion on D-Day, brought to you by CBS World News. This is CBS, the Columbia Broadcasting System.
Edwin C. Hill with the human side of the news. Presented by Johnson & Johnson, maker of Band-Aid, a ready-made adhesive bandage that helps keep little injuries little. Friends, this Tuesday, because of the special interest in war news, Band-Aid is giving up its commercial time so that Mr. Hill can give you the fullest possible report of the developments overseas. And you can be sure that if any news flashes come into the CBS newsroom during this broadcast, they will be passed on to you immediately. And now Band-Aid presents the famous American journalist, Edwin C. Hill.
Good evening, everyone. The most colossal military enterprise in all history is well underway, with the German defenses along the French coast for a distance of more than 100 miles found to be much weaker than our military leaders had feared, and with our losses much smaller than had been feared. It is possible, even probable, that in the next few minutes, perhaps most any time, a most important communique will be received here from General Eisenhower himself. If that is true, it will instantly be put before you. Although more than 4,000 ships moved steadily to the coast of Normandy under the protection of 11,000 bombing and fighting planes, the cost in killed and wounded were described by none other than General Eisenhower as very, very small. It cannot be expected that such good tidings can be long continued. Our troops and the troops of our British allies, drawn from almost every part of the great British Commonwealth of Nations, must soon engage, if they have not already done so, in the heaviest fighting. The German radio asserts that von Rundstedt, their supreme commander and a soldier of undoubted skill, is bringing up every reinforcement to the coast where, said the Germans, a battle for life or death is even now in progress. Just why initial resistance by the Germans was so unexpectedly weak along that stretch of coast from Cherbourg to Le Havre, around the estuary of the Seine River and the northeast shore of the peninsula of Normandy, seemed to be something of a surprise and a puzzle to our commanders. The Germans were known to have had probably 1,750 fighters and at least 500 bombers to meet the attack, to smash at our invasion fleet, and at the men coming ashore on every beach. But it is not forgotten that Air Marshal Goring told his air forces in an order of the day that the invasion must be beaten off, even if the Luftwaffe perish. Notwithstanding Goring's lethal orders, the German Air Force failed to put up anything in the nature of effective opposition. Perhaps the reason is apparent in the overwhelming strength of the invasion forces and in the brilliancy of planning by our generals and admirals. More than 640 naval guns ranging from 4 to 16-inch hurled many tons of shells accurately into the coastal fortifications on which the Germans had spent 4 years preparing against this day. Prime Minister Churchill was able to tell Parliament that the shore batteries had been largely quelled, the underwater obstructions had proven less dangerous than feared, and the whole operation was proceeding according to plan. It was General Sir Bernard L. Montgomery who led the seaborne troops, the American and the British, magnificently, as always he has led them, from the deserts of Africa to the fair land of France. Airborne troops, parachutes, and glider men who went in after a personal farewell from General Eisenhower played a brilliant part in the invasion picture. The Germans say they landed at Cannes and made a deep penetration at many points. It is most interesting to recall that it was from Cannes and from the Dives-sur-Mer region of coast near Deauville that William of Normandy launched his invasion of Saxon England in the year 1066. And now history, reversing, not repeating herself, sends the sons of Saxon and Norman English and of fighting Irish and other good breeds in whose veins the blood of courage and love of liberty has never ceased to flow, sends them back to that very land, almost to that very port from which they came those long years ago. It is, of course, much too soon to gather from the whole invasion picture more than a few scattered glimpses, but the scene, the panorama of the invasion, stretching along the seacoast for more than 100 miles, must have been an appallingly magnificent spectacle, could any human eye have envisioned its sweep and surge, or any human ear caught the repercussions of the great and little guns. 4,000 shiploads of soldiers. Nobody knows yet how many, although 4,000 ships could easily have carried 500,000 men to the coast of Normandy. 4,000 men, ships from 4,000 men scrambling into the surf, wading ashore, surging up onto the beaches, ready for action, going instantly into battle. Warships of the British and United States Navy standing out at sea, hurling thousands of tons of shells into the coastal defenses upon which the Germans had put 4 years of effort, countless billions in their money, and which they thought to be impregnable. The Germans themselves said that the whole Bay of the Seine was afire. If the German land troops, who must have been in great force, retreated slowly, it is difficult to believe that they could have escaped horrific losses. The English Channel skies were black with Allied warcraft, heavy and medium bombers, fighters, fighter bombers, rocket bombers, tow planes, gliders, supply and hospital craft, and possibly aerial tank carriers. Not too late with too little this time. No wonder that Mr. Churchill exclaimed to a cheering House of Commons, "What a plan! What a plan!" No wonder that General Montgomery, commander of all land forces, said to his troops, "We have absolute and complete confidence in the outcome." No wonder that General Eisenhower, the man with the greatest responsibility that has been borne by any military figure since Washington, declared with great assurance in his final order of the day, "We will accept nothing less than complete victory." A negotiated peace is not for such men as Montgomery and Eisenhower. They know the people they're up against. These men and our president, too, have said in so many words that Germany has been an incessant war maker for 1,000 years and must be reduced to military impotence and held there. They know that the Nazis and the Japanese are fighting to enslave the world. They know that we are fighting to free the slaves of the Nazis and the Japanese and to preserve our liberty. Free men can always win over military might when they're not disarmed or divided. If that were not true, the Allied forces could not have driven the Nazi hordes thousands of miles across the African desert, across the Mediterranean, and over the mountains of southern Italy. If that were not true, the retreating of German divisions would not still be running north of Rome. But as the Gustav line was not broken quickly or easily, so we must be prepared for reverses and sacrifices on the much stronger Western line before the final breakthrough. Now that the battle has begun, there's little enough that we here at home can do for our beloved ones in the thick of it all. All our war work, however essential, seems so small compared with what they are giving. Our prayers go with them this day and every day until the victorious end. God bless them and guide them and keep them. God make us worthy of it. Never in all history has so much been at stake as in the battles which are now occurring and the battles that will occur. 4 years from the day the Germans broke the Maginot Line at Sedan, less than 48 hours after the redemption of Rome, H hour of D-Day came, the moment so long awaited by the world's democracies. As a pure and simple military undertaking, the invasion was stupendous in its magnitude. As a controlling factor in the destinies of the world for generations to come, it was a stroke for which the future may never find a parallel. For upon its outcome depends the deliverance of the world from Nazi tyranny. And already, only a few hours after the opening gun was fired, there are, as I've said, indications of success in the initial phases, at least, of the greatest armed operation in all history. And as I told you at the beginning, at any moment may come a greater bulletin from General Eisenhower with a promise, I think, of even more success. And here is bulletin number 2 at this very moment from Supreme Headquarters, Allied Expeditionary Force, from Eisenhower himself. Allied forces have succeeded in their initial landings in France, and the fighting continues. And then the bulletin goes on to say that naval casualties are regarded as very light. Allied planes continue the air bombardment with very great strength throughout the day. It is with a prayer for God's support upon his lips, an unshakable conviction of ultimate triumph in his heart, that General Dwight D. Eisenhower gave the signal for attack in the early hours of this morning. The invasion of Europe began swiftly, almost silently. Advanced parties of assault troops marched into the landing stages of the English ports, clammed aboard the blunt-nosed assault craft, and then transshipped to the larger craft, swinging at anchor farther out in the harbors. They said goodbye to English soil for a long time. Gangs of service troops loaded the rations that will sustain the task force while seaborne between England and the European continent. It was said there were enough rations put aboard to last 8 days, plus 1 day of emergency combat rations. The prologue to the invasion was carried on by highly trained Army and Navy personnel and almost under the noses of the English civilian populace without attracting the slightest bit of attention. Indeed, the public had been thoroughly conditioned by many practiced embarkations and landings. Those who saw the small advance parties where the light combat packs marched to the takeoff points were not able to say that this was it, but the troops knew. They knew that the hour had come this time for sure. This was it. Assault troops of combat divisions moved into the assembly areas. Landing craft of all types began assembling close to shore. Day before yesterday, the assembly areas were changed into marshalling areas, and this meant that the troops, having been briefed of their exact mission, were reshuffled into craft loads. Yes, the invasion is on, and although the news is reassuring from the invasion coasts, we feel as if iron hands were gripping our hearts. Here in New York as in all America, as wherever lovers of human freedom await news with such intensity as very probably humankind never before experienced, this day has been a day of prayer, prayer for victory, and prayer that the toll of young life may be, by God's mercy, not too great. In homes, churches, synagogues, and schools, millions gathered humbly to entreat divine aid. The solemn mood is well expressed by the leading editorial of the New York Sun. Now is my soul troubled, and what shall I say? Father, save me from this hour. But for this cause came I unto this hour. Thus spake the Son of Man, who is also the Son of God, as he prepared to enter upon the last mile that led to Calvary and the cross. And thus today must all of us speak, those who at home suffer vicariously, and those who in the full glory of superb manhood advance toward the grand climax of all their training and preparation. Here it is. This is what we're all here for. Life and strength, youth and wisdom, courage and sacrifice, health and fortune, all we have, our hope for our children's children to have, is staked upon the adventure of this day. Let us humbly and prayerfully hope that the event may justify our highest expectations. Insofar as the human element is concerned, we need have no doubt of the outcome. They are bone of our bone and flesh of our flesh, blood of our blood, to carry on this enterprise, and they will not fail us. Insofar as technical preparation is involved, we have every right to repose the utmost confidence in our military and naval experts, who for months have been working out the plan. As for the justice of our cause, we have no occasion to fear any judgment, human or divine. We have no right to ask, no right to expect an immediate and overwhelming conquest over our resourceful and well-fortified foe. We nevertheless do believe that the best cause will win because the best men are fighting for it. That cause is our cause. Those men are our men. The distinguished prelate who presides over the Archdiocese of New York penned the most eloquent and moving supplication to the Creator of all things, as did the Right Reverend Henry St. George Tucker, presiding Bishop of the Protestant Episcopal Church and President of the Federal Council of Churches of Christ in America. none of the prayers winging heavenward in these hours of tremendous need for God's aid said more in little than that breathed by Dr. Tucker. Almighty and most merciful God, he prayed, Father of all mankind, lover of every life, hear, we beseech thee, the cry of thy children in this dark hour of conflict and danger. Thou hast been the refuge and strength in all generations of those who put their trust in thee. May it please thee this day to draw to thyself the hearts of those who struggle and endure to the uttermost. Have mercy on them, and suffer not their faith in thee to fail. Guide and protect them by thy light and strength, that they may be kept from evil. May thy comfort be sufficient for all who suffer pain or await in the agony of uncertainty. O righteous and omnipotent God, who in their tragedies and conflicts judgest the hearts of men and the purposes of nations, enter into this struggle with thy transforming power, that out of its anguish there may come a victory of righteousness. May there arise a new order which shall endure, because in it thy will shall be done in earth as it is in heaven. Forgive us and cleanse us, as well as those who strive against us, that we may be fit instruments of thy purpose. Unto thy most gracious keeping we commend our loved ones and ourselves, ascribing unto thee praise and glory through Jesus Christ our Lord. Amen.
Band-Aid, Johnson & Johnson's adhesive bandage, was happy to relinquish its commercial time on today's program so that Mr. Hill could give you a fuller report of the vital war news. This is Dan Seymour speaking for Band-Aid, and this is CBS, the Columbia Broadcasting System.
At this time, Columbia brings you Jerry Sullivan. We will interrupt the program to bring you late news developments. Jerry Sullivan's Dream House.
I have built a dream house, cozy little dream house.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to Dream House. Paul Barron and the boys in the band join me as we start the dreams humming and the rafters ringing with My Honey's Loving Arms. I love your loving arms. They hold a world of joy, a place to nestle when I am lonely, a cozy Morris chair. Oh, what a happy pair dreams come in mighty handy. They can take you right out of this world to a place where you can be with that certain somebody and see the things you want to see or do the things you want to do. And I'm in sort of a dreamy mood, so won't you come on along with me if you're going my way? Time to walk so fresh and green and clear and bright. I'm looking for some company, thought maybe we could talk. Do you go left or right? This road leads to Rainbowville. Going my way, up ahead is Bluebird Hill. Going my way, just pack a basket full of wishes, and off you start with Sunday morning in your heart. Round the bend you see a sign, Dreamer's Highway. Happiness is down the line. Going my way, the smiles you gather will look well on you. Oh, I hope you're going my way
This is CBS World News Headquarters, and here's a late bulletin just received. Supreme Headquarters of the Allied Expeditionary Force announced tonight that more than 1,000 troop-carrying aircraft, including gliders, took part in the airborne phase of the invasion of Europe. It was also announced at headquarters that the American Navy, including the cruisers Augusta and Tuscaloosa and the battleship Nevada, participated in the bombardment supporting the Allied landings. The coast-to-coast facilities of the Columbia Network will remain open until further notice, so keep tuned to your Columbia station for further invasion coverage. We return you now to our scheduled program.
was a dead giveaway in this next song. It's almost a complete chorus in its own right. Here it is. I've got those all alone and lonely, lonesome for my one and only blues. Honest. I've got those all alone and lonely, lonesome for my one and only blues. I sit around each night and dim the light and sit and reminisce until the early light with my all alone and lonely, lonesome for my one and only blues. Yes, since the day he went away, I sit and pout. I won't go out when people ask. I tell them that I'm in to stay. I'm not in the mood to play. I've got those all alone and lonely, lonesome for my one and only blues. 1 o'clock, I'm still away. 2 o'clock, the blues won't stay. 3 o'clock, it's not easy to take when you're sad. I feel so bad. I've got those all alone and lonely, lonesome for my one and only blues. I used to hold him up and act so rude. If he came back, I get into a loving mood, and no more all alone and lonely, lonesome for my one and only blues. I've got those all alone and lonely, lonesome for my one and only blues. I used to hold him up and act so rude. If he came back, I get into a loving mood. And no more all alone and lonely, lonesome for my one and only blues. Lonesome for my one and only blues. Well, it's time to close the door of the dream house for another day. But be back with us again tomorrow, won't you? Paul Barron and the boys in the band will be here with more music, and I'll be around with more songs. See you then. I have built a dream house, cozy little dream house.
Be with us on Wednesday and every day, Monday through Friday, when Columbia will again present Jerry Sullivan's Dream House. tuned to this station for the latest reports from our foreign correspondents on the world today, to be heard just 30 seconds from now. This is CBS, the Columbia Broadcasting System.
It is now 6:45 Eastern War Time by the accurate General Electric clock. Time for the world today, presented by General Electric and General Electric radio dealers. Today, General Electric is omitting its regular commercial announcement in order to bring you more news of the invasion. This is Douglas Edwards reporting that the second Allied invasion communique has been issued, and it reports that Allied forces have succeeded in their initial landings in France, and fighting continues. Now, for further details of this war bulletin and news of other developments in the invasion operations, General Electric takes you to London. Edward R. Murrow reporting.
This is London. The atmosphere at headquarters continues to be optimistic. Particular pleasure is expressed at the success of the airborne action. Tonight's communique gives no information regarding the land fighting, but there is no indication that the Germans have put in a counterattack. Tonight we were told the names of some of the American ships participating in the bombardment. The Augusta is there, so is the Tuscaloosa. Likewise, the Nevada. The Japanese tried to sink her at Pearl Harbor. The three British ships named were the Old Warspite and the cruisers Mauritius and Belfast. All day, Allied heavy bombers have been operating in support of the ground troops. They have encountered no fighter opposition. As a matter of fact, the refusal of the Germans to commit their air force is one of the principal subjects of conversation here tonight. As the official record goes, the action so far seems to have been almost too easy. The reputation of the German armies is still considerable, and there is no disposition to discount their power to hit back. And there is no official admission that our bridgehead is free from concentrated artillery fire. But the general impression is that we are now in a position to start pouring the material ashore, the tanks and the self-propelled artillery. Incidentally, they're all waterproofed for traveling in water up to 6 feet. Eyewitness accounts indicate that all movement has ceased in the area of the attack. The roads and rails carry no traffic. It means that the bombers can now start working further inland. Here is a report from Charles Collingwood, Columbia's correspondent with the Navy, who was with a tank landing craft. He says the first craft onto the beaches were the little LCVPs. They came in doggedly, looking very small and gallant with their heads up. Offshore, several miles, loomed the silhouettes of the big ships. Between them and the beaches milled an assemblage of landing craft of all kinds, forming up, waiting to go in. A few thousand yards offshore, two patrol boats stood, a mile or so apart. They marked the starting line. They were just out of range of effective machine gun fire. On those boats, each wave of landing craft dressed like a unit of foot soldiers, and were then dispatched to the beach. As each wave went in, a new group of landing craft advanced to the starting line. Their turn came, they too went in. Some of the men moved off to find and fight the enemy, destroy his guns, push him back from the beach. Others stayed at the water's edge to signal in the landing craft. Full of supplies. More and more men reached the beach. The boats kept coming in, landing their men, then backing off the shore and going back for another load. The enemy guns began firing. At one end of the beachhead, a little knot of German prisoners began to form. Back among the big ships, the admiral decided he could now send in his bigger landing vessels, send them into the shore. The LCIs and the LSTs sidled to the starting line and then headed for the beach. The LCVPs are little fellows, carried slung from the side of bigger ships. But the LCIs and the LSTs are ocean-going vessels and move under their own power. An LCI is 155 feet long and carries more than 200 soldiers. When she hits the shore, a ramp is let down from each side and the soldiers pour out onto the beach. An LST is bigger still. She's a great floating garage. When she reaches shore, her mouth opens, and trucks and vehicles of every description roll out of her and are lifted by davits from her hold. When these ships go in, the landing is well underway, and their cargoes quickly build up the power of the assault. I return you now to CBS in New York.
That was Edward R. Murrow reporting from London. We had news late this afternoon that scores of United States heavy bombers, heavily escorted by fighters, took off from an American base in Russia today and rode over the Russian-German front, showering tons of high explosives and incendiary bombs on an aerodrome at Galatz in Romania. It was the first American raid of the war from the new shuttle bases in Russian territory. To keep you posted on last-minute developments in the invasion coverage, American, Canadian, and British troops landing on the French Normandy coast to open the Western Front have fought their way 9.5 miles inland to ancient Caen within a few hours today, and the Germans reported that the gigantic Allied invasion operation is fast developing along a 60-mile front. General Eisenhower, after announcing the invasion in one sentence in his first communique, said in the second one, of which you've heard, that the initial landings have succeeded and that fighting continues. There's been no sign of a German counterattack more than 24 hours after the opening of the grand assault shortly before midnight today, apparently effecting a complete strategic and tactical surprise by landing on a soft spot between the heavily defended ports of Le Havre and Cherbourg. The Allied forces, at remarkably low cost, made good their landings in the Great Crusade and have fought their way into the streets of Caen. More invasion news in just a moment from Washington. But now, another switch overseas for a quick glimpse of the war in Italy. General Electric takes you to Rome. Farnsworth Fowle reporting.
5, 4, 3, 2, 1, whoop. It was 22:50, and our last time check.
Apparently, the time check is about 1 minute off. We've just been informed from our communications headquarters. The Farnsworth Fowle, our correspondent there, is getting set to go and will be with us in just a moment. Meantime, we'd like to remind you that the CBS network will remain on the air all night to bring you the latest news of the invasion with comprehensive reports from Columbia's correspondents and other newsmen who have been at the front. So keep tuned to your CBS station. We repeat the communique. Allied forces have succeeded in their initial landings and fighting continues. In its second communique on the invasion, SHAEF said that the Allied assault forces have met little opposition in the Channel or in the air. And now the switch to Rome. Farnsworth Fowle reporting.
This is Rome. This morning, driving back along the Appian Way, we saw two soldiers holding up a sign in big rock letters. Second front, half invaded. That was the way the news came. The men of the 5th and 8th Armies are proud that they were able to complete their assigned task of liberating Rome before the beginning of this greater and more decisive battle. The task of annihilating Kesselring's armies is yet to be completed. During the many weary months when we didn't seem to be getting anywhere, we still felt that at least we were wearing and tearing in German divisions, which would otherwise be resting up armies, and they have brought home to the Germans and the world one of the imponderables of this war, that whatever the delays and losses and reverses of a campaign, there will be no swerving from the objectives set up for our fighting men to achieve. I return you now to CBS in New York.
And next, a report on how Washington views the invasion. For that story, General Electric takes you now to Washington. Bill Henry reporting.
President Roosevelt at his news conference this afternoon could be accurately described as cheerful but sleepy. The nearly 200 correspondents who jammed into the study could testify to his cheerfulness, and he described himself as being sleepy. He said the invasion was going right up to schedule, and he made public the first figures, that we had lost only 2 destroyers and 1 landing craft in the first 12 hours, and that air losses had been only 1%, both well under expectations. Both houses of Congress opened with an attitude of prayerful solemnity and functioned in that atmosphere today. The House, however, continued its demands for prompt investigation of Pearl Harbor, and finally, after a red-hot session, passed a resolution calling for the commencement of the Pearl Harbor court-martials by September 7th of this year. Tonight, at 10 o'clock Eastern Wartime, President Roosevelt will go on the air briefly to read a prayer. The text of the prayer has already been made public, and it is the President's wish that everyone join with him as he reads it tonight. I return you to General Electric in New York.
On our World Today tonight, we have heard from Edward R. Murrow, broadcasting from London, from Farnsworth Fowle, broadcasting from Rome, and the report you've just heard from Bill Henry in Washington. This is Douglas Edwards speaking for the General Electric Company, reminding you to tune in tomorrow and every weekday at this same time and to buy another war bond and hold on to those you have. This is CBS, the Columbia Broadcasting System.
And now, B.F. Goodrich presents Joseph C. Harsh in The Meaning of the News.
This is, of course, the day when the Grand Alliance of the United Nations has finally achieved its full stature. All the hopes and fears, the planning, the disappointments, the heroism, and the plain, dull, monotonous routine of years of war sustained by millions of people with faith have converged on this historic day. This is also the day which Hitler planned would never happen. This is, in fact, a moment of supreme frustration for the man and for the evil forces which would, had they had their way, been long before this the undisputed masters of the world. Their war was skillfully and confidently planned. It was to go in a succession of blows, first east, then west, back and forth, until all opposition had vanished. It went that way at first with horrifying ease. Poland in the east and Denmark and Norway, then France in the west and Belgium and Holland. Back to the east again for the Balkans and Russia. Russia was to fall swiftly. Then Hitler would turn on Britain and wipe it out before America could throw any real weight into the balance of war. What went wrong with Hitler's plan is now a well-known story. The first flaw in the perfect crime came when a handful of brave Englishmen held at Dunkirk, not very far from where we are landing today. Held long enough to save the tiny nucleus of a British army. That little flaw widened into a crack when Britain's youngsters held the skies over England. The crack widened into a chasm when Stalingrad held firm, and Rommel was driven back from El Alamein. Those were the foundation stones on which many men have built, painfully, patiently, and well. They bound those stones together into a political grouping of nations, at first a loosely knit combination. The binding has hardened through time and the gradual emergence of confidence and respect among associates in this undertaking. Now, at long last, the finished instrument is ready and has been put to its destined use. The invasion has opened swiftly on the fall of Rome. German armies are today facing not one single front at a time, as they had planned so meticulously and shrewdly, but 5 fronts bearing down on them at once. Their troops met our invading forces on the Norman Peninsula this morning with the knowledge in every man's mind that Rome had fallen only 2 days before, and that a German army in Italy was in full shattered and humiliating retreat. They faced our men on the beaches knowing that it is only a matter of days, or perhaps even hours, before the Russian glacier starts grinding down on them again. There has been no roof over their fortress for months. Beginning today, there is no longer a safe cellar under it. What our bombs have done from above, the unleashed forces of the underground movements began from below this morning. Hitler intended to pluck down his victims one by one. Today, from above and below and on 3 sides, a reluctant world is in imposing and fearful motion against him. We can't be sure yet how strong the vaunted German defenses are. One can certainly be canceled out. German submarines are neither interfering with the Channel crossings nor are even at sea in numbers sufficient to have any serious effect. German coastal patrol boats and underwater obstacles have already been overcome easily. Secret weapons have not yet interfered with the embarkation of the crossings or the landings. The Luftwaffe has yet to show its weight in the battle. German coastal batteries must have been most effectively silenced. The President's announcement that up to this noon only 2 destroyers and 1 landing craft had been sunk is astonishing evidence of the effectiveness of last night's air bombardment and this morning's shelling from heavy ships, both of which had this purpose in view. Between midnight last night and breakfast this morning, 10,000 tons of bombs were dropped on those German coastal batteries. Perhaps that helps to explain why this evening General Eisenhower is able to report that the initial landings in France have succeeded. Beyond this announcement, we know very little about the actual places or extent of the landings, except that they are along the ancient coast of the Norman Peninsula. But we can know today that the will of the world to remain free has proved its ability to achieve a wartime coalition and to put that coalition into decisive motion. This is the day of all days which Adolf Hitler never wrote into his calculations.
Mr. Harsh's analysis of today's historic events was brought to you by B.F. Goodrich. This is CBS, the Columbia Broadcasting System.